Greetings people of the internet, welcome to another Debbie Daylight video. It's been over a year since I made my original 10 tips for Dredge video, so I thought I could make another one. If you haven't seen or known me for the past year, my name is KMD, I am literally the Dredge guy of the DB community. I played in several showcases, I have a full guide for the character, and I am overall very knowledgeable about my character. So I have gathered 11 tips this time to help you out on your Dredge journey. If you need even more tips, I would recommend checking out the previous video. It still holds up pretty well. And without further ado, let's get into the video with tip number 1. Think about what a locker teleport will give you. Time and time again, I see people teleporting mid-chase while they're already close to a survivor just to use their power for the sake of using their power without actually expecting a result from it, or expecting a result and not actually getting it because the teleport was just not really thought out. So what I want you to do is heavily consider before you teleport at any point in the game, not even during chase. If you are doing some patrolling, you want to teleport to gens that you actually want to defend. You want to not go out of your way to go across the map for no reason. You want to remember where survivors are, and during a chase, you want to abuse the fact that they cannot see you with LOS blockers, they cannot hear you. You don't want to just teleport when they are clearly looking at you and they can easily react to your movement. You want to primarily use your teleport to zone people during a chase, to get hits primarily with the concept of melee teleports and cutoffs, which I introduced in my guide. You don't want to necessarily just throw your teleport away because you're putting your power on cooldown, you're extending your chase, you're giving survivors more distance because you're losing distance if you do that. If you teleport incorrectly, because they can just get into a part of the map you just wanted to get them away from by chasing them. So yeah, think about what a teleport will give you if you actually decide to teleport doing a chase to a locker. For tip number 2, when you're trying to move around the map, ideally you don't want to position yourself incorrectly because you can end up in a scenario where you have overlapping lockers. So to make it short, position yourself better when you're trying to patrol the map. A lot of instances you will have overlapping lockers which will cause you to either eat a token or maybe cause you to go on a full cooldown when you're trying to go across the map. So ideally what I would do is make some diagonal movement, not really try to travel in a straight line. So for example, on a map that has a really big locker density like Greenville, you don't really want to move on a straight line, you want to move more diagonally so you have more angles to approach lockers across the map. Because in the case that you move in a straight line, some lockers may just overlap a bit too much and you can eat tokens and a cooldown and not actually end up where you're planning. So when you're trying to use several teleports to patrol generators, you most likely want to patrol them diagonally rather than in a straight line. When patrolling generators, you really want to just not really follow them in a straight line, but you want to go to a generator closest to you than to a generator that's on an angle not 0 degrees, I guess. And then you want to go to the third one. You don't really want to travel in a straight line because again, you can eat a cooldown and be forced to just walk to the generators. And if the generators are practically close by, you want to just kind of walk to them. You don't have to use your cooldown. Unless you're in Nightfall, then your cooldown is 4 seconds, it doesn't really matter. And you get detection of survivors too. But yeah, if you want to be more efficient with your movement, try to move diagonally when teleporting. And relating to the teleport again, tip number 3 is to remember that your teleport has 3 tokens. Even if you do misplay with overlapping lockers, keep in mind you can use 3 tokens of your teleport. They don't come into play often, but in some scenarios, you can actually take advantage of those tokens. Ideally, you want to exit out of the locker in a position where they're zoned into the worst part of the map. You don't really want to come out of the locker on edge map. It's a mistake I do regularly. It kind of takes a while to get used to because your brain wants to get the closest to a survivor possible. But sometimes it is actually better to get out of a locker further from a survivor as long as you're pushing them to the edge map, for example. So again, the whole thing about this tip is to remember you have 3 tokens. You can use them in chase pretty effectively. For map mobility, it's kind of obvious. You often use the 3rd token for mobility. And kind of condensed in this tip is to zone survivors with locker teleports. You can actually do that pretty effectively with lockers alone. Remember to push them into the edge map when you exit the locker. Don't think about getting closest to them. Think about setting up your positioning for the random play later. For tip number 4, I want you to know your limits of your character and don't play around the areas that have no lockers. Just don't go there, it's not worth your time. Play around your freedom. Find 3 generators at the start of the map that have lockers next to them and just play around them ideally. Dredge is a character that unfortunately has to play kinda dirty in the modern meta because it's just really easy to abuse with just long chases and anti-tunnel perks, unfortunately. Even if you do count your DSs, even if you wait out your DHs, it still takes a lot of time on a killer that already has a very long time to kill, considering their power is kinda taking a long time. It is very effective in a lot of scenarios, but it does take a long time to secure your hits. So know where to not go. Ideally, don't play around the areas that don't have lockers. Just pick 3 generators out of the map, maybe even 4, and play around that part of the map. You want to stick to the generators that are close to lockers, are close to each other also ideally, and you just want to chase in that area ideally. And you want to spread injuries, destroy resources, so now playing in that area later in the game when you do all other generators is gonna be harder for them. That's basically the one thing that Dredge has on, for example, Batam Preschool. Unfortunately, there isn't much of a gem spread there that has lockers next to it, but the positive is that every single generator that spawns in a building has lockers next to it. So if you go, for example, Batam Preschool, you want to play around the buildings. You want to defend your buildings, and thankfully, even if you don't have auto-mine writing, the 10-second cooldown is, I think, good enough to patrol your generators. As long as you break the walls in like the House of Pain, for example, you could be fine. I'm not saying that Batam is like an ideal map, but Dredge manages it better than most killers in the game. So as long as your chases aren't too long, because Dredge can actually end chases really quickly on Batam, surprisingly, unless you're in House of Pain, then you should be fine. So to summarize, play around the generators that are close to lockers and close to each other. Don't really go to the areas of the map that don't have any lockers, because they're just not worth patrolling. That's why you will see me often just play top side of Larry's. You don't see me going to bottom side, because bottom side has no lockers. And top side of Larry's always has a freedom. And to be clear, top side is the area with the big screens on the top that make a lot of noises. For tip number 5, I want you to play disgustingly safe if you're not confident in winning a tile. If you're, for example, in a filler, you can just not take any risk, not try to predict the sort of movement. You can just like really try to pencil them accurately. Like in a lot of scenarios, you do want to kind of make some kind of prediction to what the server you think will do with their movement. But in a lot of situations, especially against good survivors, you really just want to hold it until you make it. Of course, survivors will play around that, and then you have to throw in some predictions to throw them off and not like leave them expecting what you will do. But if you're facing someone that's really good at countering your power, just hold it. They will try to juke you, but if you just don't do that and you keep holding W, you will eventually be in land rage. Even if they decide to just go for the remnant break, you will be able to hit them because they will not make another resource, or they will be animation locked by the time you make it to them. So if you're facing someone good, just hold it. really just hold it. And especially on tiles that are kind of big, that are not as efficient with remnant as you'd think. For example, the Ormond tile, the palette is kind of easy to play on the Ormond tile, but the window is kind of difficult. So with the window, you really just want to hold it and see what the server does. If they leave the tile that's actually kind of good, just make sure you're holding your remnant in a way that actually will leave them not going to the middle of the map. Try to hold it in a way that will force them into the palette of the tile, which is a free hit most of the time, or to a tile that's on the edge map too, if the Ormond tile is, for example, on edge map. If the Ormond tile isn't on edge map, you just want to like make sure they go to the worst tile possible. So yeah, play disgustingly safe on difficult tiles. Most of the time the difficult tiles will be the long ones, which you cannot accurately like predict people on, because they will always be like outside of your healing range. So make sure to just play it safe if you're facing someone good, and throw in some predictions too to make them like keep them on their toes, you know. And speaking of hearing, tip number 6 is to play with your audio. Playing with audio is a thing that distinguishes a good Dredge from a bad Dredge. On tiles that are really high and have a lot of LOS blockers, you want to mostly rely on hearing the survivor. You can hear footsteps, you can hear guns of pain, you can sometimes even feel breathing. On tiles that are not able to be see-through for you, you really rely on your sense of hearing, which is actually pretty good. I have actually a clip here that I'm gonna show you, and I'm gonna explain it after it plays. So because of the big Nightfall boom sound of the alert that starts when you're getting close to activating Nightfall, I could not accurately hear the Claudette behind the wall. However, when I reached the end of that wall, I could not hear her after the sun already like went away, like after the alert actually ended. I couldn't hear her on that end of the wall, so I just knew that she was going to be on the other end going for the pallet. So that's why I decided to teleport there. I want you to do something like that. Even if you have some audio disruptions, you want to react to the lack of information rather than information in general. Of course, you want to react to the information too, because if you're getting the graph of pain literally behind your wall, you don't really have to use a remnant, you can just like hit them. But when you don't hear a survivor on the other side, they're probably on the other side of the wall, or they held W away if you're not on edge map. So work with audio and work with lack of audio. That's a very good tip for you. For tip number 7, I want you to go into custom games and analyze tiles and locker spreads. You will come to really interesting conclusions, and one of my favorite examples when it comes to really underrated and underappreciated dredge maps is the game on the Gideon meets Plant realm. When you go around the game, you will realize that you can hold a pretty big amount of generators in the bottom side of the map due to the amount of lockers you have there. You can pretty much patrol them very efficiently, and while bottom side is kind of difficult to look for dredge, if they go upstairs, they're free kill. The tiles upstairs are so bad that if they go upstairs, they usually die. So what you want to do when playing the game, you want to stick to the bottom floor when it comes to generators. You want to clear resources, especially god pallets on the bottom floor, and if somehow a survivor gets away and gets to the top floor, you can just kill them for free. There's no way they're surviving for more than like 30 seconds. It's really hard to not get hit on top floor against a dredge. Unless you have pixel perfect reaction time on survivor, you will get hit and you will go down if you don't go back to downstairs. So keep that in mind. Go around the maps that you have a big amount of struggles with, check around the tiles, figure out how to place them efficiently, to use lads and just take advantage of the positioning of the tile, the size of it, the direction it's facing in, and you will come to pretty interesting conclusions. You can figure out maps that are like very big and very difficult to play for most killers, like Blood Lodge, and it will have a very big impact on your gameplay in public games. So basically what I'm trying to say here is practice like you're an esport player. Play custom games to figure out pubs, basically. Okay, so I was recording this and my fucking monitor flashed and I got really scared that my PC is going to explode. And speaking of figuring out maps and tiles, for tip number 8, I want you to focus on getting rid of resources in the early game. I want you to go into your free zone that you distinguish at the start of the game, and I want you to chase survivors exclusively in that area in the early game. Get rid of pallets, get rid of resources, logs, and then focus on taking advantage of that in the late game. You, even outside of your free zone, getting rid of pallets in the early game is pretty good for setting up your late game, because even if you get some generators popped in the early game, getting those generators in the late game is going to be really difficult when no matter where you run, you only have windows to work with as a survivor, because there's no pallets, there's no logs, so you will instantly come out of lockers. You will mostly get some free hits if they don't predict your movement and they're not coordinated on communication. So even if you're not getting downs in the early game, as long as you're getting rid of pallets and logs, you're still doing a pretty good job. Just remember to stick in the area you want to defend for the late game and you should be fine. So tip number 8, remove resources in the early game. Don't really focus about getting downs. Of course, if an opportunity down Hookah Survivor arises, take that opportunity. But your main idea for the early game is to remove as much resources from the map as possible to set up your late game. Because Dredge is a killer that stacks a lot in the late game instead of the early game. You're getting stronger progressively as the match continues, basically. For tip number 9, I want you to remember a key rule also about managing resources. I want you to remember that health states are also a resource that you can deal with pretty well as Dredge because of your map mobility and also the fact that split pushing has direct synergy with your passive power of Nightfall. The more injuries you have, the faster you get Nightfall. So I want you to remember that Dredge is a very split pressure heavy killer, and setting up your injuries for late game is gonna help you a lot. Basically, you will see me often split injuries instead of securing downs in the early game to set up my Nightfall for later. And while this isn't always the best choice, it will also give you a better time in the mid game at the cost of maybe losing some generators, because you know, injured survivors will do gens, but this will give you faster chases and possibly give you a snowball. So if you know what you're doing mechanically, make sure that you set up your late game by going for more injuries, because it basically allows you to snowball better. If you don't exactly know what you're doing, stick to just taking injuries on more people. But if you know what you're doing, I will definitely do that more than taking downs in the early game. So it's a very situational weak tip, but basically if you're new, then take downs. If you're not new, then take more injuries, basically. For tip number 10, I want you to think about your remnant more creatively. Use it on map geometry like big fences, big rocks. You don't really have to use it on resources specifically. There's a lot of things in the map you can just shut down by placing yourself on one side of the tile and then placing yourself on the other side with your remnant. Because the remnant allows you to be in two places at once, right? Why do you have to run around a big fence and then risk as well getting enough distance by hugging the tile to get to a resource? Then just place yourself on one end and force them to run back into you. It really doesn't make much sense to me for people not to do that. You can use a remnant not only on resources, you know, you're not like power locked into using it only in like 5 meters of a pallet or a window. You can place it pretty much anywhere, so take advantage of that. Like put it down on drop downs to make jumps on survivors that they don't expect. Place it around a fence to just have an easier time on Batham. Place it on a rock on edge map enough so they don't just juke you and make it back to like a shitty pallet on a filler on your edge map. Place it on a Charon auto haven to just not have to run around it 7 times before you eventually get the down. Just make your life easier by using your remnant more outside of resources. And for the final, tip 11, place your remnant at exit game switches. It's something that I actually forgot about to mention in my guide and my original tips video, but it's a pretty free way of getting the 4K. If you're in a hatch standoff where you're on a pretty small map and the gate distances aren't really big, you can place your remnant at one of the exit game switches and come to the other gate relatively fast. You're like 4.0 now when turning on to your survivor speed. So if you place your remnant at one exit gate switch and you reach the other one, you can body block one exit gate switch with yourself, and if the survivor breaks the remnant on the other exit gate switch, you can just teleport there with lockers and you can just secure the free down and get the 4K. Of course, it's a very cheesy way to win the game and I don't really encourage floating too much, even though I play to win often. I think it's, if you want to really get your kill rates up and you want to like secure 4Ks more often, especially if you play competitive DBD, this is a very useful tip to secure 4Ks, especially on midwich, because midwich has a very small distance between the lockers. You can just place your remnant on one switch and get to the other side and they basically cannot leave without alerting you. Keep in mind though, it's better to place your remnant at the side of the map that has more lockers on it. If you place your remnant on the exit game switch that has literally no lockers nearby, then there's no point because they're gonna stuff away from the remnant. So yeah, that was the final tip. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you liked it, please, drop a like, subscribe, hype the video, the usual YouTuber stuff. Consider becoming a channel member if you want to support me even more and get some early access to videos, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye, internet.